Hi, welcome to the Broadbent Institute's Online Leadership School. Today's webinar is Volunteer Mobilization, a case study for team development. On behalf of the Broadbent Institute, I want to welcome you. My name is Alejandra Bravo, and I am the Director of Leadership and Training. We're delighted today to have Senior Campaigner Michal Hay here with us. Before I introduce Michal, I want to offer a brief orientation about how to participate in the webinar and some logistical information. The webinar is 1 hour long, so we're going to wrap up at 4 o'clock Eastern Time. Michal will present, and then she'll answer some questions. I'm going to act as the question moderator to make sure that we get to as many of your questions as possible, and so that Michal can freely answer them. There's great interest in this topic. We had hundreds of people inquire about it, and we had oversubscribed in terms of registrations today. But we are recording the webinar, and we'll be sharing it with you afterwards. So if you missed anything, don't worry about it. I'm just going to move along to the next slide to give you a sense of how to participate. So I hope that you're seeing my screen. You will see here that everyone is actually muted for sound quality, so we don't want to hear background noise, so that you can all hear the presenters properly. Our Twitter handle is @Broadbent, and you can use that anytime to tweet at us, and we'll try to engage as much as possible around the topic at hand today. At any time during the webinar, you can make a comment or ask a question. There's a chat box that you'll see. It's indicated right here on the slide, and you can use that. You can either message Broadbent Institute privately, or you can message everyone who's on the webinar right now. I don't see any questions coming in. Yes, someone says can hear but can't talk. So because we have so many participants, we have to mute everyone who's on the line. If you have any comments or questions or follow-up that you would like to get to afterward, you can always email me at my address, which I will be putting up at the end of the webinar. So how about we get to it? How do you mobilize a volunteer base, organizing the grassroots to build capacity for winning causes and campaigns? Big topic. Today we're going to dive into case studies to learn how to recruit, empower, and deploy volunteers, and in so doing develop a massive base of support for your issue or for your election campaign. The case studies will cover the team model and its value, the ladder of engagement, and identifying, recruiting, and training volunteer leaders. This is a chance to explore the best way to scale up your campaign, build your lists, and guess what? Win. To guide us through volunteer mobilization and the case study for development of teams is Michal Hay. Michal currently works as executive assistant to Toronto City Councillor Mike Layton, where she works on a range of policy and citywide issues and campaigns. Prior to this, she worked as a campaigner at the Toronto Environmental Alliance. The veteran campaigner has led major issue council and mayoral campaigns, as you'll see, and I'll add that she's also a board member at the Broadbent Institute. Welcome, Michal. I'm just going to take a minute now to switch to make Michal a presenter, but I can see that you're already making some comments here. Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. Someone says Mike Layton is the best. Michal might agree. Just give me a second and I'll be able to enable Michal. While I'm switching over to Michal, please feel free to use the chat box to ask any questions that you might have of Michal. Okay, so we're now switching over. Pardon, we're having some small technical difficulties with our fantastic with our internet, but we are resolving that. And I hope that you can all see voter mobilization on your screens. Let me know in the chat box if there's any problem. And I've enabled Michael's camera, so anytime she's ready to present, just want to make sure also that we've unmuted her. That would be very helpful. And there we go. Michael, you should be ready to speak and to go on camera whenever.
Hi guys, I'm unmuted, but I don't have the webcam option. But that's probably okay. Oh, okay. So it just made itself available, and I'll just pop on to say hi, and then I will disappear. So hi, thank you. Thanks for signing up for this webinar. It's my first time doing a webinar, but it's not my first time talking about this. And I noticed some very familiar names on the list of attendees. So hi to people that I've met or spoken to before. I'm going to plow through, hopefully for about 35 minutes through this presentation, and then Alejandra said we will open it up and move into some questions, and feel free to post some problems or challenges that you faced on your own as well at the end. And I'll just get down to it. I'm going to turn my webcam off so that you can see the presentation primarily. So can everybody hear me okay? I guess if I
can hear you.
ask a question, then you can just respond, and thanks, Dan, for responding. So as Alejandra said, this is a presentation on volunteer mobilization, and I sent out a survey to folks, and a good number of you actually answered it, which was very helpful. And I wanted to get a sense of where you're coming from, what type of campaigns you've worked on. There's lots of different types of campaigns: election campaigns, advocacy campaigns around a certain vote, issue-based campaigns, and then of course I was a bit surprised, but I saw there's actually a number of people who are working within unions and with their membership on different campaigns and on membership engagement. So what I've tried to cover in this presentation with the case studies are three of the campaigns that I've worked on. One is an election campaign, the second is a large citywide advocacy campaign, and the third is a campaign around a day of action and a lobby day with a large union in the city of Toronto. So I hope it's helpful. Obviously, we won't cover everything, but take from it what you would like, and then we can chat afterwards. So if you filled in the survey, you would have seen this, but usually if I'm talking about this, I pose this to people live. It's a little bit difficult here, but what are some common problems that are faced by people who manage election campaigns or smaller issue campaigns? And often we hear people talk about the following things. We don't have enough volunteers, so recruiting volunteers. There aren't enough people who are out canvassing. If you're working on an election campaign or an issue-based campaign where you're trying to turn supporters into people who take action, there's not enough support that you've actually identified in order to win. And then eventually on an election campaign, maybe you don't have enough people to get out the vote. So these are common issues that we face around volunteer recruitment and mobilization when managing campaigns. There's also problems faced by people managing very large campaigns. It's a great thing to experience these problems because it means that you are successful in a lot of ways, but it's also very challenging at times as well. So when people are on larger campaigns, often they are overwhelmed by the number of volunteers who are demanding their attention at the same time. Or if you're working on an election campaign and you have to send out canvases, you typically send those canvases out in the afternoon or evening, and that means that there's a significant number of canvases that have to be sent out at the same time, and that can be overwhelming. There's too many people to brief, debrief, or train at once, and then there's just too many phone calls to make, or emails or text messages to make, to schedule the significant number of volunteers you might have, and not enough time. And then, of course, all of us have experienced problems as the frontline volunteers, the volunteers entering the campaign. And the problems that we, or the challenges that we face as frontline volunteers often mean that we feel less enthusiastic about coming back. We're probably less likely to recruit our friends, and we don't feel valued or understand what our role really is on the campaign. So often, these are complaints that I've heard on campaigns. People walk into a campaign office and they spend 20 minutes waiting to talk to somebody just so that they can go out and do an activity. The campaign keeps asking you to come in and send you out alone and do the same kind of lonely activity. You think that you can do more tasks or different tasks, but other people don't seem interested. And also, when you do go out there and you talk to people about the issues, you want to come back and express what you heard back from people. And it doesn't always feel like people are genuinely listening to what you're hearing at the door or on the phone or wherever you're talking to people to identify support. There's also this feeling that when the campaign is over, if it's an election campaign or even an advocacy campaign, it's not clear that you'll be valuable anymore or that you'll remain a part of something. So it feels less like you're a part of something and more like you're a foot soldier. And this was actually when people did the survey that I sent out, the feeling like a foot soldier and not really feeling like people hear you, and also thinking that you could take on some more responsibilities but aren't being asked to. Those were the top responses that people said in the survey that I sent out. But that's also, all of this is precisely why I don't think we should talk about volunteer mobilization or volunteer recruitment, but we should be talking about organizing and reframing how we talk about bringing volunteers into our campaign and thinking of it as organizing rather than just sending out and mobilizing helps us approach volunteers differently and helps us improve their experience. So whether we're working in an election or outside of an election, what we're doing is we're working to create change. So we're working to elect somebody new. We're hoping to win on an issue. It could be winning a vote. We might be trying to stop something, or we might be trying to keep something because somebody new in power is trying to take it away. And we can create this change by having three things: a purpose, people, and power. Our purpose is our common goal. People are obviously the people who have committed to make this happen, and power is different for different people, but it's the resources to make something happen. And I think this is a very simple sentence here on what organizing is, but if you commit it to memory, it will actually help you structure your issue-based and electoral campaigns in a way that focuses on building the resources that you need to win. So organizing is about people with shared values coming together to create power in order to achieve a common goal. And power is that resource to achieve that goal. So what power do we have as progressives? I know everybody has different power. And I'm going to ask you a question, and you can feel free to just respond yes. I'm actually very curious to know if anybody has this power. Do people in this webinar have access to millionaires? Yes? I don't know who Teal is, but that's pretty awesome. If you guys have access to millionaires, and I don't mean people who have $1 million in debt with a house, feel free to email me after and we can talk about how we can use their power. If anybody here has access to expensive ad agencies and PR firms, that would be really great to know. That's often what people that progressives mobilize against have access to. Large print, billboard, and TV ad campaigns. And if anybody's father sits on an editorial board of a major paper, that would also be a great source of power that I would love to talk to you about if you have access to. But generally, this is not the power that we as progressives have access to. So hopefully some of you found some of those suggestions a little bit funny. And what we actually have access to is very different. So I see Ambrose mentioned something like social media as power that we have access to. Sadika just mentioned mothers as power, and those are great examples of what I think we as progressives have access to. The power that we have um, is people, and that's why it's so important that we talk about organizing and organizing effectively, because people are the source of our power. Money and wealth and positions of power, like editorial boards, those are not our sources of power traditionally, because we are seeking to make change and to change a status quo, and that status quo is held up by people who are in positions of power. So we organize, we approach our campaigns in a certain way, which I call organizing, because we want to increase our power. We want to increase our resources to achieve our goal, and we do that by increasing the number of people we have, because people are our power as progressives. So we organize to build power, and by building power that you have, by building power, you can build capacity to achieve a goal. But often our campaigns might be focused on a particular day, but we are building something greater across more than one campaign. And even if we lose a particular campaign, if we lose a particular vote, or we lose a particular election, if we approach that election and that campaign properly, we would have built capacity, we would have built power and people up that we can use after that campaign, so that we leave those campaigns stronger than we were before. If we organize effectively, we get engaged volunteers, volunteers who are inspired, and I'm going to obviously talk a little bit more about how you do this. We develop leaders. We actually end up recruiting more volunteers. The number of people that we have grows. And from my perspective, this was something I was looking for in organizing on Olivia Chow's campaign, was that we had the ability to manage thousands of people with very few people actually in management positions. And then on election campaigns or issue-based campaigns, the more people you have, the more conversations you can have about your issue or your candidate, and the more support that can be identified. So if we organize effectively, our power is increased. This is a chart from the States, and some of you might have seen it before. Let's say that you were a large presidential campaign and you had a significant amount of money, you could actually make a choice about whether or not you wanted to hire and only really focus on hiring voter contact organizers, or people who would go out and knock on doors and canvassers, or you could invest in building out a grassroots campaign. And what this chart shows is that if you invest in training people and building out a grassroots campaign, and sure, some of them might actually be paid, but you are inspiring people who want to help you to act, then you actually end up making more contacts over time. So while maybe you can make a ton of contact and identify a lot of supporters for your issue in the very beginning of a campaign, because you're just paying a lot of people to go out and knock on doors, if you take the time to invest in people, you can actually grow that base and end up making more contact over time. So that's just a lot of information, but obviously if we talk about some particular case studies, I think it'll show how these theories are applied, and maybe give you guys some ideas around what you can use in the campaigns that you're working on. So I'm going to spend most of my time talking about a mayoral campaign in Toronto, and then I'm going to touch on a union member campaign, and then last on an issue-based campaign, and then we'll go into questions. So I worked on Olivia Chow's mayoral campaign in Toronto. It was a huge campaign in 2014. We must have had the most volunteers across the city. Unfortunately, we did not win the election at the end of the day. It was, as some of you might know, a strategic vote against both Rod Ford at one point and then Doug Ford later on. But we did build something pretty incredible through the campaign, and I'm going to show you a little bit of what we did build. So I was a co-field director with one other incredible organizer, and so we started out the campaign in late March, April, and I was pretty much alone with a friend of mine. And once the campaign launched, thousands of volunteers signed up online to help out with Olivia. And in the very beginning, it was 4,500 volunteers that came in online, but very quickly that number increased. And so I had a bit of a problem because I was sitting alone, effectively, because we hadn't hired up our campaign yet. I was sitting alone in the campaign office, and I had over 4,000 people that I was supposed to interact with, get to know, start to manage, and send out on canvases. And this is, if any of you have to manage anybody in your day-to-day lives, this is a horrible management ratio. There's no way that I could effectively respond to everybody and make good use of their time and their offer to help. So I needed to do something. So the person that I was working with, his name was Nathan. Nathan and I created something that we called a fellows program that I'll talk to you just a little bit about in a bit. And we basically put out an application and asked people to apply to help out on Olivia's campaign with particular tasks. And we asked them why they wanted to help and what they thought organizing was. And from that, we recruited 150 people who demonstrated incredible leadership qualities. And we invested in training them. And I'll give you some examples of how we trained them. And those people helped me and Nathan to manage the volunteers that we had on the campaign. From those fellows, I was actually able to identify 11 organizers that we hired full-time as we moved through the campaign to help us manage the fellows, because actually 2 people managing 150 people is also not effective, and it wouldn't allow us to really invest in them and train them and help them understand how to manage the volunteers under them. And then the fellows were able to help identify leadership amongst the base of volunteers, and we actually started to build up neighborhood team leaders over time. So what was a field director to 9,000 volunteers scenario quickly became a model of distributed leadership and management. So this was our timeline. The campaign launched in March, and from April to June, we focused on capacity building. We focused on training. And so we spent the bulk of our time investing in helping our volunteers learn how to canvass, how to lead canvases, how to open up their homes to their neighbors, how to phone bank, how to turn their home into a phone bank, and then eventually how to train others to do those same things. It wasn't until July, late July, August, that we actually began to do what we would call voter contact and try to identify support. And then obviously in September and October, as we got closer to the election, we had a very intense period where everybody that we had trained was deployed to go out and identify as much vote as possible. So we could see in the campaign that graph that I showed you before, where the amount of contact we were making just took off in the fall. So our capacity building phase was really fun. We held 5 trainings across the city in different parts of the city, and over 250 people attended each training. We also hosted 7 smaller leadership trainings, and each of those trainings had about 50 people, and 1 large training conference of over 1,000 people. And that larger training conference was streamed with people. I'm just going to turn the chat off because I want to answer your questions right now, but I probably shouldn't. But what I should say, and Alejandro will help me answer them in a bit, but what I should say is that the mayoral campaign budget is actually quite small for the City of Toronto. I think the actual spending budget for the whole campaign is just over $1 million. But more than half of that has to go into ad buys, and when you think about buying signs across the whole city, that actually only leaves us with something like $100,000 for 8 months of work for field, and that includes printing materials. So we had a significantly small staff budget, and we couldn't hire very many people, which is precisely why we had this issue here with management. Because if I had a ton of money, I would have hired 150 organizers to work across the city, and I didn't. So instead, we had to depend on the volunteers that came forward and building up leadership amongst them to help them manage each other. So it was actually a very low-resourced financially campaign, but heavily resourced in terms of people power. So this capacity building phase had those 5 trainings, 250 people at each, and then smaller leadership trainings as we leveled people up, and then one large training conference that was streamed. We took the time in these 3 months to focus heavily on training people. The fellows program meant that people would commit to volunteering for 20 hours a week, but in exchange for those 20 hours, 10 of those 20 hours were spent in training. So they'd commit to 20, but we would spend 10 of those hours training them. We would also give them access to our campaign plan, which I'll talk a little bit about, through weekly conference calls where we would give them updates about what was happening, and then we organized social activities for them. Because another big part of this is creating friendships amongst people. So then we moved into our voter contact phase. And because we had invested in training people and testing people, we were able to very quickly mobilize in wards across the city. We only had one campaign office until September. And so Toronto being a very big city, we had to use people's homes. And people were trained on how to open up their homes as gathering points and then go out and canvass. So in some cases, they use parks too, which you can see in the photo here. And so people open up their homes, and their homes were these hubs of activity, and they go out and canvass in the wards. And we did this in a way that increased exponentially, because we first held a mass canvass actually in May out of our campaign office. It was a single canvass. Hundreds of volunteers came to the campaign office. We watched our fellows brief and train and send out canvassers, and then we sent people out on teams to go and canvass. Then 2 weeks later, or a week and a half later or so, we actually held 3 canvasses. We held 3 mass canvasses, and those fellows who demonstrated incredible leadership in training people at the single large canvas were asked to run their own mass canvas. And then that mass canvas went out, and after those 3 mass canvases were done, we would evaluate how they went and see who demonstrated leadership in that situation, and we were testing their homes as staging locations. And then from there, we would have 6 mass canvases in different parts of the city. So that way, by the time we were in our voter contact phase, we could hold 20 canvases. We could hold a mass canvas day out of 20 staging locations across the city, which were predominantly people's homes. This is what enabled us to drop 2 million pieces of literature by hand. We could not afford to mail them out. The campaign budget wouldn't allow for that. And then we also knocked on hundreds of thousands of doors across the city, and in some cases we knocked on them more than once. We let neighbors lead canvasses in wards across the city daily. So we let them brief each other, and we let them send the canvasses out, and they were in charge of the data collection and the data entry. Our mass canvases had these staging locations in every ward at the same time. Ultimately, we led up to the point where we were holding over 40 canvases at once. And in many cases, we had more than one large team going out in each ward, especially for the wards that were more supportive of Olivia. So taking the time to invest heavily in people meant that we built friendships, that we empowered people, and that we actually built something that was greater than one election. So a lot of people remained friends after Olivia's campaign. So I'm going to talk a little bit about building this leadership up in the volunteers. One of the biggest issues that we face on campaigns, especially as somebody that manages a campaign, is this question of like, how do I know that I can trust somebody? In a lot of ways, I didn't have a choice. Nathan didn't have a choice. We had to trust people to go out and host these canvases in their homes and effectively train people and send them out. Obviously, it wasn't perfect. I'm sure that had it all been very professional in some ways, maybe the canvases could have been better. But I actually think that imperfection and that act of people figuring it out together allows people to take on leadership and feel empowered and feel like they're a part of something. But it's important to say that we didn't just have people approach the campaign and say, I want to lead a canvass. We trained them first. So we didn't just throw people in. That's not actually fair to them or us. So we trained them, we tested them, and then we moved them up a leadership ladder. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So our leadership ladder was very simple. We had people, even people who claimed that they were experienced, we had them first do something, and then we would evaluate them, and then we allowed them to lead something, and we would evaluate them, and then we would train them. So what does that actually mean? So we would hold large canvases that we actually didn't need to do because it was too early. So making voter contact in May for an election that's in October, identifying supporters in May is not as effective as identifying them closer to the election day, because John Tory was just entering the race and people's preferences were shifting over time. But we held these events and these canvases anyway because it was an opportunity for people to get practice, to get trained, and for us to test their leadership. So we held transit canvases, group door canvases, and phone canvases. And then we had somebody who we had already trained, or somebody that we trusted, who would assess the volunteers privately on a scale from 1 to 5. And so we had a sheet for the volunteers who had RSVP'd to attend, and we would simply evaluate how they did at the canvas on a scale from 1 to 5. And those volunteers who scored 5 more than once were then asked if they would be interested in actually leading a canvas. So then we continued to hold transit canvases, door canvases, and phone canvases, and we created the space for a volunteer to be the lead of that canvas. They would be shadowed, but they were leading it, and they would have the opportunity to brief the people who were in attendance. And then again, we would assess how they did, and eventually, if those volunteers were doing a phenomenal job leading those canvases, we actually started to ask them to organize their own canvases and train other people on how to lead canvases. Those people who were leading the canvases would also be identifying people who were doing very well on those canvases and would tap them on the shoulder too and ask them if they were willing to lead a canvas in the future. So we were kind of replicating our work out. So we created the space for volunteers to organize their own. Once they had done a canvas and led a canvas, we let them organize their own transit canvas or their own door canvas, which actually led them to take ownership over what was happening and recruit their own volunteers to fill the canvas. Like I just mentioned, a part of their job was to identify leadership at the canvases and assess volunteers privately on a scale from 1 to 5. And those volunteers that had a score of 5 or more were asked to lead a canvas. And so it continued. This is how we were able to form teams of people, and we were able to build leadership in people paired with the training that we did. So we introduced people to each other, and then we actually let them have each other's contact information. So I have gone into campaigns before, and I show up in the campaign, and I'm sent to something like a voter contact organizer or somebody who's a lead canvasser, and they brief me and they send me out. Maybe they send me out with somebody, and maybe we become friends, but it's up to me to ask that person for their contact information and become their friend. We approach this very differently. We group people together. We put them on emails together and shared their emails with each other and their phone numbers with each other, and then let them self-organize. We encourage them to meet and to plan canvases on their own outside of the campaign office, and we help them through providing them with what they needed, whether it was the papers or like sample scripts. We also train them, and we help them understand through one-on-one meetings how they could take on different roles, because sometimes it would become clear as people form these groups that one person in particular liked to knock on doors and somebody else just liked to do the data entry. So they started to form these teams. And had we had more time, and I think the actual team model can take well over a year, we could have established very strong ongoing teams. And these teams were very important. People supported each other. As you can see in the photo, they motivated each other and they guided each other. They shared responsibility and they shared goals, and they motivated volunteers to keep them involved. It also allowed people to take ownership over a part of the campaign, and that's what kept them coming back. We created a space where people would want to invite their friends and their neighbors to join in, especially when it was their own living room, and sometimes that's more compelling than a call from a campaign office. The other important thing here, especially for people who work on election campaigns, is that we told people our secrets. We let them in on things that traditionally campaigns don't let people in on. So we actually showed people what our targets were. We showed them maps, like ward maps, poll maps, and we told them what our priority areas were on those maps. Some maps we had them color in. As poll by poll they were dropped, and they could see visually the goal that they had of completing coloring in this map. We told them exactly where we needed to drop literature or to knock on doors by certain dates. We told them how many supporters we needed to identify and how many we actually had. And we actually told them how many more volunteers we needed to get the work done. And this is not something, although to me it sounds very simple, but this is not something that especially election campaigns actually share with their volunteers. It's something that they keep close to their chest because they think that these are their secrets. Maybe they are secrets that should be kept secret, but I believe that if you share these goals with your volunteers, you make them want to help you achieve them. They're a part of it and they want to help meet those goals. And then they want to help lead, and they are willing to motivate others and let them in on meeting those goals. So this is obviously just an overview of it, but this model helped us solve these problems that I highlighted in the beginning. Through this model, investing in people more, I'll just go back, we were able to send people out faster onto canvases because there wasn't a bottleneck of people waiting to speak to one person. We had many people who could train people. And people were not only asked to do the same activity over and over and over again for months on a campaign. They were actually asked to take on leadership in the campaign and do something else, and they were definitely listened to. This allowed us to recruit more people and help us to achieve our targets of how many doors we wanted to knock on. And our volunteers knew that they were a part of something. They were a part of something special. They felt respected. They felt valued. And they knew that they actually played a very important role. And I should also say that throughout the entire process with our volunteers, we made it very clear to people that them knocking on doors, like the simplest task, added up, right? So if we're talking about getting out the vote on election day and your task is to knock on 100 doors, and because you knocked on those 100 doors, 5 more people went and voted that wouldn't have voted before, that doesn't actually sound like it's worth as much work as you put in. But if you have 1,000 people doing the same thing, that's 5,000 people that voted that wouldn't have voted before. So despite Olivia's loss, despite the fact that she started to fall completely in the polls through the strategic vote that was happening in October, we actually turned out a very significant vote and almost got 1/3 of the voters in the city to vote for Olivia. And that's because we had this mass movement on election day getting out the vote despite what the polls were saying. And it did feel really good. So organizing this way allowed us to manage all of these people as effectively as we could and to build up leadership with them. So that's it for the mayoral campaign. Obviously, there was a lot more to it, and I'm just going to spend a minute now highlighting an interesting campaign that I got to work on last fall with a union. So I was working with a union in Toronto that has 15,000 members, and they wanted to take a different approach to a lobby day or a day of action. They had a few goals. They wanted to raise their membership's awareness of the public policy interests that the union had. This particular union membership is not one that works in the same place together. They actually are a union whose members compete with each other for jobs. So building a sense of community among members was a big part of what the union wanted to achieve. So they wanted to make their members feel the sense of activism, of solidarity, and also a sense of community. And then, of course, they wanted to build support from elected politicians for the union's public policy interests. But they wanted all of this to happen on one day in October. So how did we do this? So I'll just say that on that one day in October, over 1,000 emails were sent to politicians across Ontario from union members. 750 union members over the course of 6 weeks had made a special commitment to take action on this day of action. 500 emails were sent from union members directly to their own politicians at all 3 levels of government. And they actually recruited 100 of their friends and families to take action as well and send emails. And then 75 members of this union who had never done this before had actually been trained over the course of 6 weeks and met with 30 elected officials across Ontario. And each of those elected officials were their own members of parliament or members of provincial parliament. So those MPPs and MPs were meeting with their own constituent who were members of this union. So they did this by taking a unique and decentralized approach to lobbying. Traditionally, I believe that unions, when they have lobby days, they send their union staff, who might have been union members before, but they send them to Queen's Park or to Parliament to lobby ministers. Instead of doing that, I helped them run a 6-week campaign that led up to the day of action, where we identified interested union members. So we just put a call out to see who might be interested. We accepted their response. We offered them training. And we helped them by setting up the meetings for them, almost acting like their administrative assistant. And we helped them to meet with their politicians directly in their ridings during constituency week, which is the week that MPs and MPPs are at home in their ridings. For those that did not have the time to meet in person, we helped them gain direct access to their politicians through email and by phone, and gave them sample messages to do this. So the first thing that we did was we asked them to make a commitment to act. That was the first step in our ladder of engagement. This was kind of copying my experience with election campaigns with a pledge to vote. So in Obama's campaign, they had a vote pledge. For months, people went around and committed to voting for Obama in the election, and then the campaign could then turn those commitments into supporters who they got out to vote, or turn them into volunteers. So we did something very similar, created a physical form and an online form, and sent communications out to all 15,000 members and asked them with compelling messaging who would be willing or interested in taking action on this day of action. So we asked for this commitment, and we did this at the Labor Day Parade, at a conference that they hosted, and at a number of events, and we did it through emails, and over 750 of their members signed up and said, I want to be involved in this. And then what we did, it was a pretty heavy task, but we started assigning ridings, looking up where these members lived, and assigning their MPs and MPPs to them. And we made sure that they knew who their MPs and MPPs were. Then we looked to see if there were a significant number of members who lived in one riding. And if that did happen, we would ask that MP and MPP if they would be willing to meet with their constituents. We also asked those people who committed to act if they would help us get more people to commit to act as they had. And so we started to turn them into recruiters. On the day of action, everybody who made the commitment to act received a personalized email that included the full contact information of their local MP and their MPP. And it also included sample emails and tweets that the members could use to send to their elected officials. But importantly, we also made it as easy as possible. So it included links within the email that would open up their email client and generate an email to the recipients on it with a pre-written subject line and pre-written content that they could edit. It also had links within the email that would open up Twitter, and a tweet would be generated at their member of parliament or their member of provincial parliament, and then they could edit the tweet and send it out. So there was a ton of action on social media on the day of action as well. We were able to do this because we had worked with these members beforehand and primed them for the 6 weeks before. Importantly, once somebody committed to act, we asked them if they would be interested in meeting in person with their politician. If they were, we offered them training on how to do this. So we held 3 large in-person trainings and then 3 trainings by phone as well. And people got to ask questions, and they were made to feel a little bit more comfortable about how to have these meetings. We gave them the tools to do this by giving them sample messaging and lobby kits and things that would make them feel more comfortable going into the meetings. And then not only did we arrange the meetings with the politicians, but we actually set up a meeting spot an hour before the meeting with their local politician at a local coffee shop. where they could gather for an hour and get to know each other and practice what they would do in that meeting. But that helped to build a sense of community amongst those members who had probably never met before. And then they did go and meet with their politicians, and then ultimately we had this broad action on the day of action.
Michael, just reminding you that you have about 5 minutes
Okay, sorry, it's almost done.
before we
Um,
take.
so the union took the time to empower their members, and they built a sense of community, and many of them had never met with a politician before, but by the end of it, they wanted to do more. So after the day of action, a lot of members wanted to continue to be involved in this type of political advocacy. So just very briefly, there was an issue-based campaign in Toronto, the No Casino campaign. These guys were swarming. The mayor at the time, Rob Ford, wanted to put a mega casino in the downtown, and this is a list of people who were lobbying city councilors. It was like as if every single lobbyist in the city of Toronto had been hired to convince city councilors to put a casino in the downtown. And so these ladies, 3 ladies who didn't run an organization, stepped in to try and stop this. They wanted to stop the proposed downtown mega casino, and they had to convince 23 of 45 councillors to vote no. When they entered the campaign, there were only 10 councillors who were ready to vote no to the casino, and they had a lot of work to do to actually win the vote at council, and they needed to run a targeted ground campaign with an online campaign in order to do this. And this was seen as the David versus Goliath battle. So on one side we had MGM, Paul Godfrey, the OLG, and other casino giants. And then on the other hand, we had a few people in the city who had no organizational base, but who had a willingness to learn and invest their time and build something. And so the Toronto Star also pitched this as a David versus Goliath battle. And a good example of this is the No Casino campaign over the course of almost a year had spent $3,200 versus the OLG, who had spent $5.75 million in a week-long media blitz fighting for the casino. So you can see the imbalance in resources there. So these 3 incredible women, some people who understood city council, that was where I kind of came in, an artist, late nights, and a genuine love for our work and our goal, which I think is something our enemy usually lacks, is how we were able to defeat the mega casino in downtown Toronto. So these are just some of the people, the faith community got involved as well. So the No Casino Toronto campaign, because they didn't have an organizational base, had to take the time to train people and provide space for people to take leadership within their neighborhoods, within people's homes. They held targeted door canvases across the city. They delivered hundreds of signs. They raised tens of thousands of dollars from small donations, and they shifted public opinion on the downtown casino. And in the end, we were able to deliver 25,000 petitions to City Council. So over the course of a year and a half of work of building this grassroots campaign across the city that allowed people to take on leadership who had never taken on leadership on this before, this all actually led to a decisive victory, and what was a vote of 10 to 35 became a vote of 40 to 4. So City Council voted almost unanimously to kill the casino. And these are brief examples, but they're all why I wanted to talk more about organizing and volunteer mobilization. So this is all to say that if you think about organizing and approaching volunteers differently, what you're actually doing is you're building power. You make time and trust people with information and tasks that might challenge you because you're not used to sharing that information. You make a training plan. So it is a lot of work, but you make a training plan and you invest a lot of time into giving people skills and support before you deploy them. You create canvases and opportunities that you might not actually need to happen, but you do this to test and to build leadership. And you let people lead without you, because some people will fail, but I'm sure most people will actually surprise you. And that's it. Sorry it took so long.
Oh no, fantastic. Thank you so much, Michael. I'm going to go on camera just to, and maybe you can put yourself on camera too to answer some of these questions and make this dynamic in the last 7 minutes. We have lots of people interested, obviously, in your presentation. I'm going to group the questions in sort of 3 general areas. Let's start with What needs to be in place before recruitment? And if you could do it again, would you have started in the same order? Two field directors, 9,000 volunteers, and then filling in the pyramid from fellows to, and then organizers, and then the neighborhood leads.
I actually don't think we knew that that many people would sign up. So that was a bit of a surprise for us, and we had to very quickly come up with what a training model would be for all of these volunteers. So if I'd had the, now that I know, if I did it again, I would have built out a much larger training model, and I would have invested even more time in training the volunteers. And actually, if I had the power to, I might have encouraged Olivia to enter the race even earlier. Maybe that strategically wouldn't have made sense, but from my perspective as field director, it would have made sense so that we could start training people sooner.
Okay, another group of questions has to do with how you transition from the capacity building phase into when the election is far away. Two questions from Anna and Teal. From Anna was, what was the ask coming out of the sort of April capacity building phase for the campaign? And from Teal, if you're 2 years out, how do you retain people's attention when you don't have, for example, specific like canvassing for marks?
Yeah. Well, I guess the big problem that we have here is that unless people go off and work on work for other organizations, without an ongoing campaign municipally, because we don't have a party system, we actually don't have a place for people to be engaged. So there is a loss. And what I just noticed happening naturally was that a lot of people from the campaign went and found other places to get involved. So whether that was getting involved in the federal election that followed, or getting involved with other nonprofit organizations and advocacy organizations in the city.
Right, so you built power in other places. So there was a question around that I've answered a bit online about what the legacy has been of fellows working as organizers and working as political staff, some of them getting ready to be candidates one day, etc. And probably a recent city council win in Toronto that broke through for progressives is in part built on the work that you've done. Another group of questions was about sort of a double-barreled question around ensuring quality when you're letting go of control, when you have young people doing canvasses, when you are, when you're making those assessments to make sure that the people that are you're moving up the ladder are actually a 5 and not a 1. That's one question. How do you do that? And the second part is around what tools and software did volunteers have access to so that they could actually feed into the campaign?
Yeah. Um, so it was really just pen and paper with people out in the field watching people. So they were sort of being shadowed a little bit with people who had experience to see how they did in training and leading people. And if they didn't do well, we didn't just write them off and give them a 3 out of 5. We helped them know what they could do better, and we worked with them. And sometimes people had to do something 3 or 4 times before they could actually start to organize their own canvases. And I think some people are very quiet if they haven't been asked to take on leadership, but they actually surprise you if you give them an opportunity to lead and you challenge them to come forward and take on that leadership. So I think if you give people an opportunity, they will surprise you. It's not for everybody, but usually those people know that it's not for them, and it just kind of balances out. In terms of technology, we use Google Docs a lot because we could just share spreadsheets with people. And then the website itself was based on Nation Builder, but that wasn't something that we gave everybody access to. Really, it was just forms and Google Docs.
Great. And presumably along the way, there's tests that tell you about quality,
Yeah.
so that you built into your leadership development work. One of the questions was, in addition to some of the legacy pieces that came out of that 9,000 person volunteer base, has Olivia been in touch with those volunteers, and is there a plan to do anything like that? And a sort of a related question, what should people be doing now to get ready for example, in 2018 in Ontario, there are municipal elections, but there are elections coming in different provinces across the country. We have a federal election in 2019. What do you think people should be doing now?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of by-elections happening, so people should get involved in those to get practice before they go into the big general election. We just had a by-election in the city of Toronto and elected a progressive city councillor, and we actually recently mobilized a ton of Olivia's volunteers and gave them an opportunity to take leadership on that campaign. Olivia herself has stayed in touch with her volunteers. She's running a leadership school through Ryerson right now, and so she's continued to train them and she's continued to work with them. And then in terms of getting ready for the election, I think you should, I mean, if you're not involved in an organized party or you're not involved with an organized nonprofit, but you just want to do something on your own, I think at that point all you can really do is talk to your friends and neighbors about it and see who else is interested and make a list of people that you think you could deploy yourself on election day or once a campaign has begun. I hope that helps.
Great, thank you. And we have run out of time, and we've got to almost every question, which is fantastic, and lots of good feedback from our participants. I'm just going to put up one final slide so that if I can actually do that. My email address is abravo@broadbandinstitute.ca. Let us know if you have any comments or questions that didn't get answered today, and I'll make sure to get them to Michael and we'll answer them together. I really am very grateful for everyone's participation. We had lots of people on the line and really good debates in the chat box. Thank you on behalf of Broadband Institute. Thank you so much, Michael, for taking us through these powerful case studies. They give us a lot to think about what's possible when we actually look at distributing power and influence to build capacity over time. I hope it will inspire a lot of action and moves for capacity building on our participants today. And of course, I want to thank all of you who took the time to participate with us today. We will be sharing a recording in case you want to refer back to anything that was shared today. And with that, I'm signing off. Take care.